Welcome to the $0 Landlord Infinite Percent Off Bootcamp, where it actually pays you money at the end of the day when you close your first property. So real fast, the objective of $0 Landlord is to teach a $15,000 course that enables anybody to buy a multifamily property. You still got to put in the work. But pre-seling's mission is to just bring resources, trust, and just common sense to real estate investing so we can make it significantly better because it kind of sucks right now. So here's a quick case study. I overpaid 34% for a $335,000 property, but I ended up putting $0 down into the deal. We ended up fixing the property for $0. It appraised for $800,000 later on. I ended up splitting all the work with partners. I own 40%. And then that means that after about 21 minutes on average on a week and 100% remote from a computer, then I'm making about $10,000 an hour on that property. So here's the top 25 jobs in the US, and they don't even come close combined if you multiply them by 4. And I've done this over a dozen times. So hopefully I have a little bit of a track record, but you can end up making your own justification for yourself in your own opinion if you go online to preselling.com. Okay, so here's a little bit more about me. Year 1 of real estate, I ended up buying 1 unit. Year 2, about 51 units because I used other people's money. Year 3, I went back to my bad ways and I ended up buying with my own money again. And then year 4, the results speak for themselves. I finally learned the right lesson, which is to buy with other people's money. So almost all of them were with $0 out of pocket. And I'm estimated to be in about the top 200 mobile home park buyers in the US because that is like my thing that I really like to do. You can see all my deal history if you go on the website as well, where you can make your opinion. But clearly 6 of my partners already have a very good opinion because they closed their first deal with me for $0 out of pocket. So there's no gurus or gotchas. I'm actually wanting people to end up buying property with me, without me, doesn't matter. This is all free anyway. If I really wanted to, I could put it behind a paywall. And everybody's made millions of dollars. And most of the 6 partners to date have over 100 units in their very first year. So this does work. It's all free. Please learn. Please. I don't know if I can stress that enough. All right, here's some more stuff about me and my background. So I went to the U.S. Air Force Academy where I was an officer, and I ended up working for a nuclear modernization program. So I ended up saving the taxpayers a lot of money, basically, at the end of the day. And then I ended up doing the same thing twice over on a different program office. So while I was good at my W-2 job, then it just didn't give me the freedom I actually needed. And I spent a lot of time really struggling to find the financial path forward. And I'm sure that a lot of you guys watching this are probably in the same boat as I was. I ended up losing money, lost friends, missed out on events just so I could learn how to do this. So I'm trying to teach you guys this for free. And I didn't have a community at the time, which is why I built one. So you can go learn at the free community where you can also figure it out, or you can suffer. It's up to you. There's a QR code right there. Pause the video, scan it. Otherwise, I'm sure it's going to be in the link in the description below. So we're going to talk about contract writing because contracts are very misunderstood concept. They're not as hard as they sound, but I'm going to try to break this down as best as I can. So once you figure out what you actually want to put in writing, then just turn it into legalese is what we call it. So just figure out the way to actually put it in contract writing. So if you can fog a mirror, i.e. you have a pulse, then you can write a contract. It's not that hard to do. Writing enforceable contracts is just a little bit harder because it requires common sense, which isn't always super common. And then bulletproof contract writing, which is what I'll try to get you on the path towards. That's what takes a lot of skill and practice. And honestly, if you're at that point where you need bulletproof contracts, you just get an attorney to do it because they're probably going to be better than you. I hope they are. Otherwise, you don't have a very good attorney. Another quick note is if you have a state or a local law that is going to make some part of your contract unenforceable, you have to use what's known as a severability clause. So this is a very standard one on the screen. Make sure you have something like this in every contract that you have. Otherwise, if I said, I'm just going to come up with some random example, so hopefully, but if I said, I promise to give you 2 pieces of paper if you also give me a purple hat. And a quick note as well, if you have in your verbiage in your contract something that is not technically legal according to the local state government, I'm not talking about illegal, I'm saying not legal, like it's not enforceable, then you need to have what's known as a severability clause. This will protect your document from not just completely becoming unenforceable. Only that one section will become unenforceable. So it's typically called a severability clause. Make sure this is present in every contract you have. Otherwise, if one thing is off, your entire document could be null and void. By the way, this is a very standard severability clause. You could use this verbatim in any contract you want, free of charge. That's what I'm trying to help. Also, I'm not officially an attorney, so take what I'm saying with a grain of salt. This is just advice technically, right? Writing contracts is not that hard though. So if you want them to actually survive, then you do need to put a little bit more work into them. So if you have experience multiplied by time, multiplied by miscellaneous factors, that is equal to your outcome. So the best way to put this is if you have a level 100 attorney who spends 10 minutes on reviewing a contract, you could beat him even if you're a level 1 player if you just spend more time and assuming miscellaneous factors don't screw you up. So it's the equivalent of like a Rattata versus an Arceus, for those you guys that played Pokemon growing up. You can win, even technically. It's just unlikely. You just want to put in the time. That's actually going to be what ends up getting you there. So what exactly is a contract? So the aspects of a contract, and by the way, there's going to be a lot of stuff. Just bear with me here for a second. So you have the offer, right? That is what you are actually proposing to give out. You have the acceptance, which is they're saying, yes, I accept the terms of this, and it's very clear that they are accepting it. You have the consideration, which is a huge point. Most people miss this actually if they're wholesaling like property, for instance, and they don't even realize they're doing stuff illegal. So stay tuned here for a second. I'll explain it. That is something of value that's exchanged in consideration for goods and services. You have the capacity, which means that they can't be having dementia or something of a legal. They have to have the legal capacity, basically. They also can't be underage. That's another very common one. So if you're 17, you are not able to have a contract be enforceable. And then legality as well. So if it's, I'm going to sell you drugs and then we're going to sign a contract over that, that's not legal, because unless that drug is legal in that state, I suppose. And then awareness is everybody has to be aware of what they're signing. This is actually a little bit of a big one. So you really want people to sign multiple times. Don't just have one signature at the very end. You have to be able to adequately prove, yeah, they did know what they were signing. At the minimum, you should be having people initial every single page of a document, because that proves awareness. And if anything, shows that they just skipped through it and they were not the one to read it, not you trying to do a gotcha. So if you've ever wondered why you've had to read terms and conditions by force sometimes on like some software, it's because they want to make sure they don't get sued over the awareness aspect. So again, try to cook this into a contract that you have. Make sure that it has initials on every single page. Is a very, very easy way to, most of the time, trump this. Again, by the way, I'm not officially an attorney. Take what I'm saying as a grain of salt, but I have done a lot of contracts. Okay, common contracts that you will end up writing a lot of times, it's going to be stuff like your purchase and sale agreement. That's the very standard one that most people are familiar with, or that most people are going to interact with. However, there are a lot more, like operating agreements that dictates how a company is ran, who owns what happens in whatever scenario, right? That has to be outlined in what's known as the operating agreement. That's also known as like the bylaws of a company. So it's just the rules and regulations of that company and how it interacts with its members. Seller mortgage agreements are also very common, especially even if you're wholesaling. But honestly, if you're buying a property and you have seller finance mortgages or notes in there, you need to make sure that you understand what you're writing, and you need to make sure that you understand what you're signing at the end of the day too. Management agreements for your property is also very important. And then contractor agreements is also very important. What does right look like? Who pays what when? What are the installment periods on something? Who pays for materials? You got to make sure that's in writing and make sure it's done well. Even stuff like yard care agreements. This guy's going to come by and mow my yard twice a month. Here's what right looks like. Here's what wrong looks like. Make sure you have stuff in there like that. You can find literally all of these on preselling.com. And if I don't currently have them up there right now, I will have them up in the near future. So make sure you get on there. Get used to going to preselling.com. If you need any resource, it's always going to be free. Okay, now let's just assume that you're going to end up be repairing something. So what are all the things to be repaired? Don't just say fix the house. You got to make a list of all repairs that are needing to be done. So you need to clearly define what right looks like. Now, it'd be like saying paint the walls is not very descriptive, versus end up saying all drywall has to be covered and all other surfaces use this particular type of paint, use a primer beforehand, use this exact egg sheen. Here's when it's due by as well. That would be a good one to include. No stains or uneven surfaces or uneven color, right? It's a lot more descriptive. So if you're not doing stuff like this, that's probably what leaves you open to basically legal issues at the end of the day, because you're going to end up saying that guy didn't do it right. And he's going to say, you told me to paint the walls and I did. So you're going to have an uphill battle unless you are very specific. So this one slide, honestly, is the best description of how to do contract writing. Just be descriptive. If you're not very descriptive, you're not going to be doing it very well at all. So that's why these contracts can end up getting 20 pages long. You don't need to do that for most instances. You can just do 7 pages. Okay, so hold on here for a second. There's going to be a lot of stuff. We're going to break down a purchase and sale agreement and what all goes into this. So we have an address and property ID. We have purchase price and terms. We end up having EMD, which is earnest money deposit. We have due diligence period, also known as DD, and your closing timeline. You have closing costs, prorations, and adjustments. You have contingencies, if any. And then you also have default and remedies, which is what happens if something bad goes wrong, or something bad happens, I suppose. And then finally, you have signature with date. So this is everything you really need to know that goes into a purchase and sale agreement, which is also known as a PSA. I'm going to break these all down a little bit further, though, for you. So address and property ID, specific definition of a property. So you should be saying stuff like the tax parcel ID. So it's going to look something like that. It would also be the address, which is 123 Main Street, whatever, right? Very descriptive. But then you also want to add a third definition, which is what's known as the legal definition. You can find this on like a tax assessor website for whatever the local county is. Just type in 123 county, whatever county you're operating in, look up the tax assessor, and then that's where you can find the legal definition for this stuff. If you have all three of these, title or whoever's going to end up closing your property at the end of the day is going to have to go check every single one of these and make sure they all match up. And if they don't, then it's a good thing you didn't end up buying the wrong property by accident. Purchase price and terms, price is going to be equal to your total price. It's pretty straightforward. Payment structure, how are you buying it? Are you buying it with cash? Are you buying it with a bank? Are you buying it through seller financing? Or are you buying it through some other method? You need to specify that. Also, earnest money deposit. This is going to be consideration. So remember, we were talking about why most contracts are actually not valid. It's because unless you put in earnest money deposit, you don't actually have a valid contract. You have not given anything, even though it's refundable, you have not given anything in consideration. So you need to make sure that you're putting in EMD on properties technically for them to be valid. And your earnest money deposit is going to be going towards the purchase price of the property at the end of the day. So if you end up closing the property and your earnest money was $1,000, then your property price, the remainder to close, is now $1,000 lower. That's it. And then it's usually going to go back to the buyer if the buyer terminates, unless it's specified otherwise in the agreement. But that's pretty customary on how it works. Due diligence period. This is your DD period, is what it's known as. This is when you're trying to understand everything that's going on with the property, make sure it's the right property for you to buy. Also known as the inspection period. So during due diligence period, you can back out of the property risk-free. You get your earnest money back, put it in your pocket, unless it's specified some other way. So if you say in the contract, the buyer will only get 90% of their earnest money back, then that's what's in writing, that's what's going to happen. But typically, it's going to be all the earnest money would go back during due diligence period. It just depends on how you end up writing it. So you also want to have what items you're going to need from the seller specified during this period. Otherwise, it's not going to have legal effect. So you need to say, I need to know the following, and you need to put that in your contract. You don't just tell them that later on, because you can hope that they'll tell it to you, but they may not actually end up telling you whatever the information is that you need. So unless you put it in writing, it's not going to happen. Closing timeline. So that's what date you're actually going to end up closing on the property. So you can either set a specified date, or you can say X number of days in the future from the signing, or you can say X number of days after due diligence ends. You can do whatever you want. You just need to be very specific. Closing costs. That is going to be the allocation of all costs for closing. Usually you'd say something like 50% done by the buyer, all done by the buyer, whatever. And everything needs to be specified as well. You can't just say all costs. You have to say, here's what is included. So, and I'll show you in a second what's typical as well. I just want to show you what's typical terms for everything. But now we'll be talking about prorations. So that's going to be taxes and rent are prorated. And so what that basically means is if I'm closing halfway through a month and the landlord has collected all of the rent, then they owe me the other half of the rent, right? So again, if somebody is renting a property for $1,000 a month and I buy that property from them and I close halfway through the month, the landlord owes me half of that rent, i.e. what is remaining. Unless specified otherwise in writing, taxes are paid on an annual basis, so that's why you make sure you get this prorated as well. Adjustments would just be anything else that wasn't covered above, but typically for your proration, it's going to be taxes and rent. Contingencies. So if you have financing contingency in there saying, if I don't get good lending, then I can't buy this property and I need my earnest money back, you could include that if you wanted to. You could even put weather contingency. And it's not like, you could technically do it as if it's raining on the day of closing, but it's just smarter to do like, hey, if there's a hurricane or something or some crazy factor, then I don't need to be losing my earnest money deposit just because some hurricane comes blowing on through and that I can't control. So it's actually really smart to include stuff like that as well. And if the bank doesn't approve the loan, what happens? Financing contingency. That's why you want to make sure you have something in there. Default and remedies, that's going to be saying what if the buyer doesn't follow through or what if the seller doesn't follow through. And then signature and date is going to be very clearly saying, yes, I agree to all of the above, and everybody that is involved in this transaction is signing, saying, yes, I want to do this transaction. Okay, so here's what it looks like on each one of these as far as what's typical. So we all have your address, which is pretty straightforward, purchase price and terms. You gotta make sure you include everything. If it's creative finance, it's gonna be like your seller finance, your sub two, whatever. You gotta make sure you include all that in there. Earnest money deposit as well. You need to make sure you have that specified, but a typical is 1% of the purchase price. I highly recommend you only do $1,000 every time, regardless of how much money the total purchase price is. And I will talk about earnest money, why you should do that in just a second, and how to overcome some objections. Due diligence period and closing timeline. So for single family, it's usually around 7 to 14 days for due diligence, and then about a 30-day close total. Multifamily, it's like 7 to 21 day due diligence period and a 60 to 90 day total close period. Again, these are just general guidelines. You do whatever you want, but always remember at the end of the day, if you're offering, hey, I'll close, within 24 hours of signing, you're probably going to have you may have the seller say, I don't believe you. So make sure to justify it to them. But it is more favorable for a seller to close even faster on a property rather than sit around and wait and hope that somebody ends up actually closing on the property. So make sure that you're cooking in enough time that you get your business done, but don't actually have so much time in there that you're hurting your own transaction. Closing costs and prorations, the buyer's usually going to end up paying all closing costs. That's very typical nowadays. And then usually it's just your escrow and title fees. Contingencies, if there's a bank, financing contingency is pretty common, but sellers don't like to see that typically. And then default and remedies is if there's earnest money deposit to be kept by the seller and the buyer, then basically saying that the buyer is not liable for damages. So again, let me break that down. So default and remedies, usually EMD is kept by the seller if the buyer does not close. And then if the buyer does not close, they are not liable for damages. But if the seller does not close on the property, they usually are liable for damages. Again, just specify it in your contract. And then signature with date, DocuSign and third-party digital signing services are okay, but the emphasis is that it's a third-party digital signing service, not you going on, some PDF viewer and like digitally drawing on your signature. Like use an actual formal e-signing service because it goes through a different legal channel basically. And then wet signatures are also fine to do, so literally signing it. All right, now we're going to talk about earnest money and how to overcome the objections that you're frequently going to hear from sellers or sellers' agents. So earnest money, again, a quick reminder, it is refundable until the end of due diligence period, according to most contracts, right? Almost all of the time is going to be written like this. You're the one writing the contract at the end of the day, so you just got to make sure it's actually written in there. And then typically it's non-refundable, i.e. it goes quote unquote hard after the due diligence period. So earnest money should be $1,000 or like $500 if it's a really small property every time. That was my opinion, but I'll explain why. So, and that should be regardless of the price. Also, you can, it's a little quote unquote tricky. And like we were talking about the consideration earlier, while you don't have an enforceable contract necessarily, you can roll the dice to hope that it's not going to be unenforced. And you can actually just say earnest money shall be due before the end of due diligence period. That is actually totally fine because there's no point of throwing money up that is not already 100% non-refundable. So it's up to you how you want to do that. If you don't have the earnest money, you should probably just throw in the earnest money to begin with and just keep it at $1,000. But if you don't have it at all, you could do this trick as well. So, but just make sure that you're understanding it is not technically a legal contract until you put in earnest money. So, typical objection that you're going to be hearing is, EMD is 1% of the price. Like you need to be putting in more. Forget that, right? The issue is actually you. It's just because they don't trust you enough. So here's how you should be presenting it. So you got to do it with challenges like this, and don't be too aggressive. They should be like, well, do you think I'm going to waste my time with this property? I've been the only one to actually give you an offer as serious as mine. I'm not about to tie up $10,000, assuming you're buying $1 million thing, when I could go close more deals. Why would I tie up my money in the meantime? Right? If there's something you're not willing to tell me about the property, then maybe this shouldn't even be a deal to begin with. I don't know why you'd be so concerned with the earnest money unless you're just trying to make sure that I'm locked all the way in. You could also say, if I run into a serious issue, I'm just going to back out anyway. So why do I tie up my cash to begin with? Or you can say, hopefully you didn't think I was just going to work for free, not close, and also be silly enough to lose $10,000. So yeah, earnest money is $1,000 at the end of the day. And just make it a non-negotiable. If you don't have the money, just say it's non-negotiable. $1,000, that's it. Hopefully you got $1,000. If you don't, there's other people out there that can help you out on that. So here's the best questions you should have for due diligence. So you do not want to be overwhelming your seller. And if you ask them a million questions all up front, then it's going to completely overwhelm your seller and they're not going to want to talk to you. So save as many as possible until you get under contract. And then you should also have all those questions be answerable during your due diligence period. You should not be doing them after due diligence period, but you could if you really needed to. Make your due diligence period long enough as well so that you're able to inspect the property, make a full list of all repairs that need to be done with your estimates and quotes. Then you also need to be raising capital. Then you also need to finalize your operating agreement. Then you also need to get the deal funded before due diligence is over. Or you could risk losing all your earnest money. So the choice is yours, but I would say if a deal comes through and you get it under contract, you need to go really, really hard on making sure that actually gets done. So do all those things, make sure you have enough time to get all those things done. Single family rentals do not require permits, but you should check as well. So usually everything else does need to have a permit of some sort. So make sure to be looking with your local county or local office and make sure that you are accounting for these items. Okay, I got a free master due diligence checklist. This is every question you are probably going to ever need. And it's currently 248 questions and it's growing. And I'm going to continue to make it even better over time. So if you need access to this, it is going to be available on the website. There is a QR code. That is kind of what it looks like on the right side. And what's also really nice is you can simply export it and send it off to a seller very, very quickly. It's 100% free. It's a community resource. This is the great stuff that our community does at preselling.com. So if you haven't joined the community already, you probably should. It's where you're going to be able to meet all your future business partners. Okay, so if you can't see the property, you need to get what's known as a boots on the ground. So a boots on the ground guy is somebody you use time leverage to. So instead of you flying out to go see the property, you get somebody else to go take photos of the property. Now, it's probably better if you were to be the one to look at it, but it's not required. For me personally, I've been able to close almost everything without even seeing it. Somebody needs to see the property though at the end of the day. And Google Forms is probably the best way that you can end up getting a boots on the ground guy. So that's using code leverage, basically. Again, think back to module 1. So Craigslist is probably the best spot to just get some random guy to go take photos, but you got to make sure they're not like a complete criminal or anything like that. But you have Craigslist and you have them answer a Google form. So if you want a template of a Google form, here's another free resource, 100% on the house. Just go download it right there. And this is just a basic template of, hey, I need you to fill out, or I need you to fill this out in order to tell me what your availability looks like in order to go out and take photos. Here's what the payment structure looks like. It's $50 total, half now, half later. Something like that is really simple. But if you give your email out on Craigslist, you're going to get a million responses back. So just use a Google form. It's a lot easier. Okay, best practices for actually closing the property. So it could just go under contract with just you, and then you just assign it to your LLC later on. You just need to make sure you actually have the assignability wording in there. Even if you don't, then they're probably not going to really care at the end of the day. If you explain to the seller, hey, I intend on closing this property through an LLC. If you're using a bank, make sure that you are having all of your contingencies to extend until all of the financing is complete. If you don't, then you may have an issue where the bank does not give you a loan in time, and then you actually are technically in default of the contract. Then it's up to the seller to say, hey, I'm going to cancel this contract and keep your earnest money or not. Make sure that you are saving all of your documents right after closing. So take all these things, stick them in a drive folder. As everything comes out of closing, you are going to need every single document. You'll have the paper versions, but you should also get the digitally scanned versions for everything. Just ask your closing attorney, hey, can you please scan all this and then email it to me? And they probably will. Okay. You definitely want to have one point of contact when you're actually closing the property. You do not want to have 3 chiefs. You just want to have one person who's running the ship on actually closing it. There's also probably going to be one person that's signing on behalf of the company as much as possible, unless you're using a bank, in which case a lot of times people have to personally guarantee debt, which means that they need to personally sign. So one point of contact does most of the signing. If everybody else needs to sign, that's fine too. Run all your emails through one email chain as much as humanly possible, and do it from your company email too. Just create a little Gmail, whatever email, and have that be for your closing and also for your property operation. But run it through one email chain. Otherwise, your inbox is going to be like this. and your closing attorney is going to be really pissed because they're having 15,000 other closings going on at the same time as yours, and they don't have time to deal with all your 20 email chains. Also, you're not going to know what's going on either. Capital raising and structures. So laziness allows everyone else to use leverage against you. This is why you're falling behind. So if you're doing a capital raise, you need to make sure that it is not high effort to get the info. You should include the information because people will assume that it's bad, and maybe they get the info, maybe they don't if it's missing. So it's just a lot of work for everybody else. Additionally, people are not able to decide on whether or not they should invest in a deal until they actually get all the info. So would you fund something that had all of these criteria? Probably not. So this is the Hormozi value formula, as you probably recall. So if you look at this as an example here, this is exactly what I'm talking about. It's high effort info, is missing a lot of information. Maybe I'll end up getting any information, and I can't decide until we actually end up getting all the info. So 1, 2, 3, and 4 clearly identified exactly what is time delay, effort sacrifice, dream outcome, and perceived likelihood of achievement. So make sure you would actually be willing to fund your own deal if you had the money, but make sure you're pitching it to yourself in the right way. So if you notice, this guy just said it's a duplex. It didn't include any information about it. I don't know what that means. Maybe he's intentionally not telling me stuff because the deal sucks. I don't know. There's one photo on there. It doesn't even have a phone number on there. If you look at the ratio of like saves to views, it's not good. Also, he's clearly having a price reduction, so he didn't even price it right. It's probably because nobody wants to call him up and say, hey, you know what? I want to buy your property because it looks great. Nobody's said that in the history of ever for this particular guy. Okay, more on the Hormozi value formula from $100 million sales from Alex Hormozi. Capital raising is sales because nobody wants a deal where they are the one signing the debt and there's an inexperienced operator and there's a low return and there's a low certainty of pro forma and there's issues with no solution and it's missing info. So if you are capital raising and you're doing like this, you are wrong. You need to change it. So I've literally color coded this so it's very, very clear. Make sure you specify what is the return. If you don't even know the return, don't even bother trying to raise capital for it. How likely is it? Have you done deals before? How certain are you on the pro forma numbers? Is it just issues with no solution? You can increase the likelihood of success if you actually have a solution ready in advance, even if there is an issue. Signing the debt is something that is not usually done by limited partners. So if you have somebody else trying to come in and co-sign, you better give up some equity. That is not fair to just say, hey, you got to sign all of this multi-million-dollar debt and you get nothing. That's nothing extra. Like, that's not appropriate. And then not having your info ready just causes more time delay. I constantly am turning down deals all the time where maybe they're good deals, but I don't want to take the time to figure out if they are or not because people don't have their ducks in a row and they say, here's all the facts. So if you are capital raising, make sure you're doing all of these things every single time correctly, not what's on the screen. Okay, pitching the deal is usually more important than actually the deal itself, right? So joke telling is more about delivery than the actual joke. So if I say for bad delivery, the Scarecrow won an award for being outstanding, you're probably not going to get the joke. But if I make a really big deal out of it and I say, why did the Scarecrow win an award? Because he's outstanding in his field. And I even couple it with boom, visual aid. Now you understand, oh, okay, it's a joke. I'm supposed to laugh. Ha 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 ha. Very funny, right? So again, very lame joke, not a comedian, shows on every Tuesday, right? So it's the point is you need to actually be pitching the deal with a good delivery. If you are just showing up unprepared, showing up late, not showing up at all, don't have your facts in a row, you're going to have a terrible time capital raising. 4 main capital structures for when you are capital raising. So you have the main one, which is debt plus equity. So that's going to be the limited partner is giving a loan against the property, and then they're also an equity partner in it. You have straight equity, which is where there is no loan, just limited partner as a percent owner of the company that is buying the property at the end of the day. Capped equity, which is where a limited partner is a percent partner, but their earnings cannot exceed X, Y, or Z. And you can just specify this however it is you want. And then lastly, preferred return, which is more or less just like a loan. So saying, hey, you have to pay us first, and then you can do whatever you want afterwards. So an item to note, debt plus equity is probably going to be the most common structure you're going to run into. Straight equity is very rare because what that means if I'm buying a property for $500,000 and I say I'm going to take 75%, limited partner is going to get 25%, then that guy's value on day one, even though he funded it for $500K, if I resell that property for $500K, that guy only makes $125K back into his pocket, which means he lost a ton of money. So if it's a very high value add project, then it would make sense to do straight equity. Otherwise, it's usually debt plus equity makes sense. Capped equity is also good if it is a high return project, as you can say, hey, I need funding, but I am going to triple your money and I would like to buy you back out at triple. And they'll say, okay, great. All right, that sounds good with me, because most people are cool with a triple return. So that's nice. If their valuation would have gone 10x, then at least now you're able to buy them out at 3x and keep the rest of it for yourself. And then finally, preferred return. A lender is like a great example of this, like a normal cookie cutter bank. It's like, hey, you got to pay us first. But a preferred return is more like saying the actual company is obligated to have to pay that prior to anything else. A bank is not up in your personal business like that as much. So a preferred return, when in reference to a company, is saying the company must pay back these people this amount prior to doing any other financial transaction. So preferred return is basically just a lender, though. So again, these are your main four. Debt plus equity is the most common. Straight equity means people are really betting on you. Capped equity is you're really betting on the project, and as a result, you're saying, hey, I want to buy you back out. And then preferred return is basically just debt. And then finally, you have custom. Just do whatever you want. The world is your oyster. Just make a deal that actually makes sense for everybody at the end of the day. Okay, number one mistake that everybody will probably make, unless I specifically outline it, is on the very next slide. It absolutely will prevent you from going bankrupt. So you should probably pay really, really close attention to this. I want to make 100% of the property, money, and all the profit with 100% debt. That's what most people say, right? All debt, all the profit, all by myself, no partners. Really silly. By being less greedy, you actually make more money. So you will find deals faster. Just take whatever you can and just buy it. So if somebody's offering you a 20-80 split and you get 20%, they get 80, fine, whatever. It's your first deal. You don't get to be picky. Or you could sit over there by yourself and say, but I want 100% of the profit. It's like, well, you don't have anything right now and you don't have any experience either. So I don't understand why you would think it's appropriate to say 100% of the profit. Don't try to do that. And when people can't partner with other people, they just try to load up on debt. Don't do that. The real cost of trying to maximize your return to 100% is that you're going to miss out on a lot of deals because you have no experience. Also, the deals that you can't fund because you don't have the profit from the first deal, you're going to miss out on those too. So you can't even fund your own deals in the future because you're not moving forward at all. So you should be willing to work for basically free, just get through the experience, and then you're going to probably make a good buck, a good dollar, good buck, whatever, on your very first deal. You're probably going to make several tens of thousands of dollars. And if you're not, maybe you're not looking at the right deals. And then finally, the time that you're wasting to actually close your first deal by just making the same mistakes over and over and over, it's like you could just learn everything there is to know about a deal if you're just willing to work for less on your very first one. It just makes the most sense. My first deal, I got 12%. There was 3 partners. I only got 12% ownership. But you know what? I actually closed the deal, made almost 6 figures on that very first deal, $0 out of pocket on my first one. Imagine how the remaining dozen went. It's great, right? But I didn't have the remaining dozen unless I did that very first one. I could have said, no, I want 100% of the profit all by myself. Or I could say, hey, you know what? I'm going to work with other people. I'm going to take a lot less because I'm less experienced at the end of the day. And if you know how to do all this yourself, great. You can totally skip this slide and you can go gamble your money. But if you don't have experience and you don't have capital, you need to be willing to contribute more time into the deal and take less profit as a result. So you need to be looking for a higher dollar an hour over time. So if you start out and you actually have experience, the second go around, you can charge a lot more, so to speak. You can say, you know what? I'm not going to settle for 10%. I need 20% on this deal. That's fine. Now you just doubled your dollar an hour on the second deal, assuming they're the exact same. Okay, by raising capital for equity, you end up also having less debt. So if you are not able, so if you do raise capital for equity, you literally cannot lose money at the end of the day, unless the property just hemorrhages so hard that you just were the stupidest person on the planet that you decide to buy something that was going to go absolutely down to zero, right? And even then, you could just forfeit your shares in theory, right? So if you don't put money in, you actually, as long as you're not personally guaranteeing it, you actually are not liable for the negative outcome of that, as long as you do your job. So if $1 million property is funded by an LP, a limited partner, for $200K, and it goes downhill, and now it's worth only $800K, then only the limited partner can lose. You lose time. Limited partners are big boys and girls. That's why they fund these things, because they get a large return, but every now and then they don't turn out well. That's how it is. Now, my limited partners have been in that situation, but the point is it does happen. So they are doing this because they're willing to accept that risk. So let them accept that risk. Also, just ride out for another 2 years. That would be the other way. So it will just probably bounce back to $1 million after a certain amount of time. You can just manage the property the right way. If you're literally swinging a hammer on like single families, you can't just force appreciate things. But if you were managing a business operation like multifamily, then it's a lot easier to increase the value if you just do good management practices. Debt is literally by definition the only thing that can bankrupt you. Like there is not something that can bankrupt you other than debt. Try to come up with a single example. It's like, well, but like I don't pay my tax bills. Great, that's a debt that you owe, right? So just don't have so much debt because it's the only thing that can set you back down to level zero. And it's called being over leveraged when you have far too much debt. So if $1 million property is funded by you and it goes to 800K, you just lost. You should not do that. That is what most people do as their mistake. Like, look at me, I got 100% funding. I'm so cool. No, it's not cool because now you're broke. We structure our deals so that the limited partners are usually making 2 to 3x over 2 to 3 years. We'll probably start being a little pickier about this actually over time and start to reduce that. But I like this as a good benchmark metric. I like paying our limited partners a lot of money because they come back. So I would very much rather they be very, very happy by making a boatload of cash in a very short time period. And then they say, great, we're in the next one. It's not very hard to raise capital a second go around. So that's approximately 20 to 40% annualized. And then that's an IRR, which is an invested rate of return. So that's the future value divided by the current value. So that's how you would calculate approximately what the return is. So it would increase over time as well. Also, a lot of limited partners think that it's 30% to the general partners and 70% to the limited partners. You got to remember, they may not be coming at it from the same frame of reference you are. They may be saying, but it's a Class A apartment complex is what I'm used to. And you got some other ratty multifamily portfolio thing going on. They're going to assume that they just take 70% because that's what they're used to. You should structure it off of how much money they're going to make, i.e. 2 to 3x over 2 to 3 years. A very good baseline to do. It's not very difficult to get funding at that point. If you're watching this video and you like to triple your money, you probably would take that deal all day long. That's a pretty good return, assuming the guy's not a dingus that's running the property. So, I mean, you tell me, would you do that or would you throw it in the stock market? So this also assumes no debt, and this is a typical deal, so to speak, for these guys, right? So there's a really simple trick to not getting totally hosed on a deal, which is in the next module. If we remember capital leverage from module 1, that's borrowing to buy since you don't have enough cash. There's way less money in, mostly same result. That's what it looks like. Time leverage, you have an outsourcing of a task so that you have more time. So way less time in, mostly same result, looks like that. Skill leverage is the most underappreciated leverage of the big three, in my opinion. Most people don't even think about this kind of stuff. It's because they end up making slightly less money and it bugs them. It's hiring somebody, yeah, it costs money, but hiring somebody to just do it better than you because they are better than you are at that task. So why would you spend a lot of time going to plumber school to learn how to be a plumber when you could just hire a plumber? That just makes a lot more sense. So you spend a lot of money and a lot of time studying, or you basically don't have to do hardly any research and you get a lot of time back. So general partners are a general partner known as a GP takes percent profit from the deal to pay for themselves in exchange for time and work, versus strategic partners known as SPs improve the profit of a deal to pay for themselves for skill and experience. So by definition, an SP increases the value of the deal. Now, I'm going to point out it doesn't necessarily have to be a dollar amount that's increased, but it's typically a dollar amount that's increased. If you just want to partner with somebody to make your personal time ridiculously off the charts good on an efficiency standpoint, then that also still might make sense. But a lot of times an SP is going to actually improve the profit of the deal because they can usually score better negotiating terms. They can score better bank financing terms. They understand how to increase the profit more just because they're really experienced at it at the end of the day. So very experienced consulting role. They are not doing a lot of the work. They're actually just consulting and trying to guide the whole project. And it's a lot easier to fund due to experience. So higher level relationships also open up and you can get a lot more profitable deals. Because if somebody's very, very experienced, they probably have a good lead pipeline coming through that they need a lot of help on. So here's the case study before having an SP. So if you see it says at the top there, no SP. So number of partners, 3, highest experience, low, list price was at $1 million, buy price was at 900, right? You can read the rest of it here. This is afterwards. This is utilizing an SP. So what they were able to do in this situation was they were able to, even though the price is slightly worse or whatever because it's increased, they're actually having way better bank financing terms, and they got the seller to carry in second position and they actually end up getting in for a negative down payment. So if you look at cash to close there, it's negative $40,000. So before it was requiring over a quarter mil, like basically over a third mil actually, and now they got in for a negative down payment with an SP because the SP knew what they were doing, and they're like, hey, let's just structure it this way. Your profit per general partner went from $100,000 to over $180,000 after including a fourth partner, right? So that's like somebody came in and increased the profit for everybody and also paid for themselves as a result. So the company count in that case was significantly higher. So this is 86% more profit per general partner, and this is a real deal. I was the SP on this one. So I don't like partnering on every deal in existence. I only like partnering on things that I can increase the value for people, because then it actually is not a really hard pitch. It's like, hey, do you want to make more money? They're like, sure. Great, bring me on board. Like, it's not rocket science, right? So yeah, go online, presummit.com. You can see every single deal I've ever done, but this is a very real case study. I'm actually going to make a lot more content talking about all the case studies we've done to date. So this is probably one of the best examples of an SP because, again, way better financing terms, way higher profit per person, and also the pro forma is going to be a lot higher as well, i.e. like the total profit to actually be made. So strategic partners bring better deal structuring, more experience, due diligence, negotiation, bank terms, because they have more experience, they can get easier qualification for it. They also have more personal cash flow a lot of times. There's better seller financing terms because there's just better negotiating going on. And then also just if you have more experience, it's a lot easier to get seller financing terms. There's even more stuff you can do, right? Here's all the great things you can get. Risk mitigation is freaking huge. You have got to make sure you're mitigating risk at every turn if you want to make sure that you are never getting screwed. But it's really easy if you don't do a lot of debt into a deal because you did it all through capital raise and equity, then you don't really have any real risk to begin with. So instead of risk mitigation of what money you could lose, there's also risk mitigation of making sure that you make the maximum profit. Because if there's a risk that you only make half as much money, it's like that's still kind of a risk if you think about it. So make sure you're including an SP in every deal you do. And ideally, they should be by definition way more experienced than you if you regard them as an SP. And they know what to do and what not to do. And a lot of times knowing what not to do is actually more important. So how much does it cost you not knowing how to make $1 million a year, a freaking $1 million a year? So use a SP that is the best for your situation. It's not one size fits all. One guy is always the best SP. It's whoever you personally resonate with or you personally know or is the best fit for that particular type of project. It doesn't matter, right? Just pick the person that's best. Because if an SP has spent 10,000 hours on something and you've done maybe 20, you could just save all the time and get paid more in the process by bringing on an SP. It just makes a ton of sense. Also, if an SP spends $10,000 actually doing deals, it would take you all of their experience minus your experience to get the same outcome. So get somebody that's way more experienced. It's a little, silly to think that you're like, oh, but I'm going to learn like 10,000 hours of stuff by tomorrow. It's like you literally can't. So everybody needs an SP. So this is just the trajectory for growth, how to make more money. There's always bigger fish at the end of the day. It just depends on the category. So you need to get what you need in order to level up with the next one, whatever, again, that skill category is. So for Alex Hormozi, that's his particular profit model, pretty much. And then, you need to split the profit with an SP because at the end of the day, they're not going to work for free. And they're sure as hell not going to work for 5%. Like it's probably going to be whatever your share is also going to be their share if you want them to care. So here's a good example is I gave Investment Joy, who's basically, if you don't know who this guy is, it's like the laundromat guy, but he also owns a lot of other stuff and he's doing roofing company flips and whatnot. So he's more proficient than I am in other areas, and he definitely has a significantly larger social media following than I do. So he's my SP in that context, actually, because I need a social media, buddy that can help me out on growing my audience long term. So I gave him 25% equity on a $2 million profit deal. That's like $500,000 to another guy. But at the end of the day, it's probably going to help me out a lot too, because a lot of people are going to want to end up coming into the community. It's going to help grow the community. It's going to all work out for everybody as well. So I'm making a $500,000 investment for you guys that are watching. So quick case study. Purchase price was $650K. We have pro forma. Sorry, my camera's in the way. Pro forma year one, $1.2 million, and then profit was $550K. So the SP scored insanely good terms, which is 95% seller financing. So, you are hard pressed to get better than that. By the way, this had an agent on there too. So the seller walked away with zero and also had a $5K seller credit and a $40K private debt. So there was actually 27.5K was required to close. So 15K of that came from a limited partner, and some limited partners said, I want 70%. I'm like, dude, for 15K, are you freaking kidding me? That'd be 25X on your money. Like, that's insanely inappropriate amount to ask in 1 year. Like, just think about how crazy 2,500% return in a year. Like, no, I'm not going to do that. So general partners would have made 120K each over 3 years. An SP ended up coming in and saved the negotiating. So it was 4.2% equity. So LP got 3.5X over 3 years, which is still very good for the LP. 3.5X, again, we go for 2 to 3X over 2 to 3 years, and 3.5 is over that. So very, very good deal for everybody. SP got a 3.1% or 3.1 times better deal for all the GPs. That's 380K over 3 yeyears. So again, using SP, they are definitely worth it. And everybody just has their own SP that they need at the end of the day. So team structure, here's how you involve an SP. Here's how you structure your whole team for maximum success. So I'm going to categorize these based off of experience level, saying 1, 2, 3, and then the last one, PM, which is your property management. So you have your acquisition. That's who's acquiring the thing at the end of the day, right? There should only be one person that's doing that. You have your workflow POC. That's going to be who's running the taskers, who's making sure all taskers are getting done correctly, make sure they're organized as well, who's running the meetings. Strategic POC, that's going to be who's actually making the execution plan to say, hey, big picture, here's where the company needs to go. We need to do X, Y, and Z for development. We need to do these things by Q2, whatever, right? That's kind of like your big ones there. And you have another one, of course, is your LP relations. Who's talking to the LPs, who's raising the capital. You can see why every single one of these are a little tougher, and they're all in the experience number 1 category. So experience number 2 category, you have financial. So that's going to be handling all the bills, paying all the stuff like the bills, making sure that you have all your records straightened out in Excel, just download your bank account statements. You also have that ready to go for taxes, just talking with your CPA, making sure that you got everything organized there. Legal as well. If there's a legal issue that comes in the door, make sure you're going to be able to handle that. This is pretty much 9 times out of 10 going to be an eviction, but every now and then you may get some other tenant that's just trying to, it could be a legitimate complaint too. Like, I don't know, a tree falls in the road and hits their car, right? Who's handling that lawsuit? And then disposition as well. Who ends up actually selling the property at the end of the day? That's also really important to do. So, and then, by the way, last one as well, it's just miscellaneous. Like, I would highly recommend that you have a category called miscellaneous, where if it's not covered in a different category, then it by default is that person's role. Your third experience level would be best to have for management and for CapEx. So your management is going to be managing the property manager, and your CapEx is going to be the person that's in charge of getting all the quotes, all the work packages put together, making sure they're operating all the repairs and list of return on invested capital from highest to lowest. And then you also have administrative. So it's going to be who's handling all the files, utility bills, because they're getting paid by the finance guy, sure, but like you got to make sure the accounts are in good compliance. Water and electrical is not getting shut off randomly, stuff like that. The LLC form should be kept up to date. So think kind of more like a secretary on that particular one. And then also email, because if you have a lot of emails coming in, then you got to make sure they're flowing to the right people as well. And then finally, you have property manager, which is not a actual part of your company most of the time. So your property manager is just an outside entity, but they are resolving almost all the tenant issues. And they go to the management point of contact or the management lead, and they say, hey, here's my issue. I need your help on X, Y, and Z. So this is your whole table. If you look on the right side, there's a corporate equivalent to all of these. If you've ever heard of these terms, if you even care, but otherwise they're pretty straightforward. I came up with these leads and definitions. I use them in every company that I do. That's what I've found very helpful. But if you don't specify who's doing what, it is an absolute nightmare. So here's another way to look at all of your roles and responsibilities here from skill experience. So number 1 is usually going to be best to have them with your SP. You get a high return for everyone as well. So if your acquisition goes well, if your taskers go well, if your strategy goes well, and if your funding goes well, that's stuff you want your most experienced guy on the team, or at least most experienced with those categories. You want that guy running the ship on those, because those are incredibly sensitive levers. It's going to dramatically increase the output at the end of the day for everybody else. So this is typically worth 33 to 50% of GP shares. I would just recommend that you have everybody have the same shares at the end of the day, but this is like a boatload of work. And if you've done a lot, it's easier, but it is a ton of work. All right, so second skill level. So any previous deal experience that you have is good in these scenarios. It's not required, but it is strongly recommended. and that's about 25 to 50%, just roughly. And then third category for management, CapEx, administrative, and email, that's the best to learn, because if you think about, you're the gate. So any work order goes through you if you're that gate. If you are dealing with a management company, management is giving you issues and you're resolving those at the lowest level that you can. Again, just think of it as a corporate stack, but it's a lot of tasks that actually have to get done. So it's incredibly important that your bedrock foundation in your company is performing well. So there's not like one of these is better. It's just you really want to pair people up based off of experience in particular. And that's worth about 10 to 25% roughly. And also, if they are a little bit more experienced, they could be worth up to about 33%. That's just out of my experience. I've done like a dozen of these, so this is how I personally would set them up. And then finally, your property management is not a partner. And usually it's 10% of rent, by the way, if you didn't know. It's just, it can go higher or lower depending on the situation. So call it plus or minus 2%, depending on how hard the property is to run. Now we're talking about the number of people per team. So if you have one person on your team, then you are never out of office, ever. You were the only one. You have to do everything all by yourself. It's like a one-legged table. It sucks, right? And if you have two people on your team, it's likely going to deteriorate over time because it's not a real group at that point. Also, one partner is always going to have a different goal than the other, and one person is going to end up doing more work than the other a lot of times. So it ends up leading to an unstable partnership. It's like having this table. It's a two-legged table. Technically, it's standing up right now, but if you knock it over, it will fall. Okay, what I think is the best is a three-person setup. So you have collective wisdom if you have three people in a group. You also don't have too much bureaucracy, so to speak, of like running it through approval for everybody. You have a lot of skill efficiency or skill leverage, which leads to higher efficiency as well, because everyone's able to execute what they're actually good at rather than just, hey, we're going to split the workload down the middle 50-50. It's like, dude, if I'm only good at a third of the tasks and I'm doing half the work, it's not good. But if everybody's good at 1/3 on their own little share, the whole project gets done a lot faster. So the structure will usually last over several deals. I've actually seen this a lot of times myself. It's like a three-legged table. It's basically impossible to have it be wobbly, like by design. Like it's geometrically impossible. Also, for four-person, there is a chance for too much debating, too much bureaucracy, essentially. So it's okay if you have a large deal or if there's a certain type of like special circumstance going on. But again, just like with a normal four-legged table, it can be a little wobbly. Finally, a five-person is not smart because no one feels like they want to do any work, and it's way overkill. So that is a insanely hefty table there, but I don't think you need to build a table that looks like that in order to have it be stable. You can just do three legs. That's fine. So also there's actually more chance of it wobbling, basically. So clear winner out of all of them, based off of my experience, is literally down to the number 1/3. So 43% of my units, and then 1/3 of them. That's how the numbers happen to work out there. And then 28% of the time it was with one GP. So yeah, that numbers speak for themselves. So highly recommend you go for 3 general partners. Again, that's technically how I work best, but that's also how I've seen a lot of other people do best. So you want to have a responsibility matrix with all of these roles and responsibilities. So you're going to literally say, here's the roles, here's person A, B, and C, here's what they're responsible for. So you'd say a 1, a 2, or an X, or a 3, right? So what I mean by that is number 1 is they are first responsible for whatever that particular role is. Number 2 is they are secondarily responsible for whatever that role is, and they make sure that number 1 completes it. If number 1 is out of office, number 2 picks up the slack. Same thing happens for number 3. Make sure that number 2 isn't going after number 1. Also, if 1 and 2 are out of office, number 3 takes over. And if you have an X, just say, hey, I'm not responsible. I don't care how you do it. I would recommend something kind of like this. That's a pretty straightforward 1, 2, and 3, assuming A is most experienced, B is second most, and C is third most. That's how I would set it up. But you need to set up backups before there's problems. And also just having it clearly identified reduces the amount of chit chat of like, well, who's doing what and what's fair? It's like, you guys already agreed to what's fair at the beginning. Just execute. It's so much faster. Information is one thing, but application is everything. So if you haven't already, you really need to be joining for all the free weekly events we have going on in the community Discord. There's the QR code up on the screen right there. And if you haven't learned anything or thought about anything differently, good for you. Your parents must love you for just being so teachable. Your significant other must love you for just being a really great listener. And your kids must love you because you're just rolling in cash. Otherwise, you need to pay me. Here's all my payment methods. You can give me 40 seconds of positive feedback or negative feedback. You can send this video to somebody that you think is going to actually benefit from it, which cough, cough is going to be your future business partner probably if you send it to them. And then you can also subscribe for time-sensitive and exclusive resource alerts that I'm going to be having in the future. Also, join the community for networking events, resources, deals, everything you need. And we've got something special coming for the earliest joining members. I'm not going to announce when the cutoff is, but it's coming soon. Also, you can just send me $15,000 if you want. Just kidding. Everything's free. Go on the website for preselling.com if you want to see this video and all the other modules as well. Also, lastly, here is an auto due diligence tool, and I'm about to make this way better. It is insanely helpful if you are buying a property or you're looking to buy a property. You just want to get a quick cursory idea of like, is this a good deal on the other subjective factors? Like, how is the crime rate? What is the radon levels? What is the risk of a hurricane? Most people don't even look at that kind of stuff, but it's detrimental to a deal. So if you haven't already, you should seriously go check this out. It's 100% free. Go online to preselling.com/resources.